become desensitized to D2 receptors, which means you need more dopamine in order to get the same pleasure and motivation and drive to do things. Then the brain just becomes accustomed to this and says, today we're talking health stuff, but we're talking something a little bit more sinister, and that is highly processed foods. It's pretty amazing that the hubris exists that correlations to chronic disease and health and even mental health issues aren't tied to nutrition more often. And one of the biggest things that is concerning, to say the least, is the bliss point. And this is an engineered method that was developed testing on soldiers in order to increase calorie intake by 40%. And the information on it is clearly there. The research is there, the studies are there, and we're still like turning up our nose to it, not admitting that this is going the increase in cardiovascular disease, which is the number one killer of people in the world, goes hand in hand with the amount of profit correlating to highly processed food industries. And by the end, we're going to talk about stuff that like gave me goosebumps because it's just wild how it all connects. But let's start from how the bliss point came to be. It started with this guy named Howard Moskowitz, who was a psychophysicist. And I didn't know what a psychophysicist was until today, but let's read the definition. A psychophysicist is a scientist who studies the relationship between physical stimuli and the sensations or perceptions they produce, essentially quantifying how the mind perceives the physical world, often focusing on sensory thresholds to measure physical intensity against subjective experience. So, this guy Howard was hired by the Army to study the what is now called bliss point in order to increase calorie consumption of C rations, which were the precursor to MREs, which were filled with like spam and beans, and nobody wanted to eat them. So the Army saw this as a waste and wanted to increase the amount that soldiers wanted to eat, which, you know, in theory too, is also not a necessarily a bad thing, because if you're not eating the things you need to eat in the field, then you're looking at malnutrition and such. But what he did was took 7 years and around 8,000 soldiers and tested these different combinations of fats, salts, mouthfeel, emulsifiers, and all these things, and came up with this perfect formula, what is now known as the bliss point. And the wild thing is, after 7 years of this research, and I wrote a blog on this, and I have the link to the Army research in the blog. The Army documents are in there, and it tells you all the foods they tried and all the likelihood of high likelihood, low likelihood of consumption. But he took this playbook and sold it to the food industry after he got done in the 7 year period with the military, and the Army gave him a gold medal for it. And then opened a consulting firm. And his number one customer at the time was the makers of Jell-O. And he formulated the perfect combination of things to make Jell-O irresistible. Took Prego, the common marinara sauce, and engineered it perfectly with the sugar content and the chunkiness of tomatoes in order to increase sales by 30%, bringing in $600 million to the food company owners. They did this with multiple different things in order to figure out the perfect amount of these things like sugar, fat, salt, crunch, in order to get a addictive state similar to alcohol, drugs, and other things. So he did that consulting up until 2014, and then later followed it into another company, which is even more concerning in my mind, of like, if you look at what they're doing now, and talk about that. The bliss point creates a lot of issues, and you see the same effects that I talked about in the alcohol video of the effects on the nucleus accumbens, which is an area in the brain that helps with the regulation of dopamine, and dopamine is your motivation and reward neurotransmitter. And when you decrease the amount of dopamine, you see a decrease in motivation, drive to do things, learning capabilities. You shrink the prefrontal cortex. The same things that you see with alcohol consumption are seen with ultra processed food consumption. It was confirmed in MRIs done in 2021. They also did a study where subjects for 2 weeks would eat ultra processed foods or whole foods. And the subset of people that ate the processed foods overconsumed up to 500 calories and gained weight versus the group that ate whole foods and regular foods that weren't ultra processed foods. The correlation to the dopamine, though, as we see with gambling and drugs and alcohol and now social media addiction, it's no different with food because you increase the level of dopamine needed in the receptors because they become desensitized to D2 receptors, which means you need more dopamine in order to get the same pleasure and motivation and drive to do things. Then the brain just becomes accustomed to this and says, well, I guess we just don't need the reward system anymore, and down regulates dopamine altogether. So then you have a lack of motivation, lack of drive. And to me, it's like heartbreaking to see the increased obesity levels in children. And when a 5-year-old kid has no influence outside his parents and what they're educated on and feeding to their children, and how that's influenced by targeting billions of dollars to kids on marketing and ads the same way cigarettes did decades ago, it's like, man, what are we doing? Nowadays, not only do they have the combination of sugars and fats and all these different things, but now we have chemical additives like MSG and food dyes. And like I talked about, the citric acid and soda that cleans out your mouth after you eat a fatty cheeseburger and fries in order to cleanse the satiating sensors in the mouth in order for you to want to consume more. They understand that combination and pair them together specifically in order to have us overconsume calories and buy more food. We see a direct correlation of obesity, chronic illness, cardiovascular disease, and the increased profits of food industry. And not only that, the business that Moskowitz founded after he did the food consulting focuses on this topic of mind genomics, which is an experimental method of surveying and researching people for academic purposes to study everyday habits of people and decisions and attitudes towards food consumption, social issues, health behaviors, and even radicalization. And there's no direct correlation between how they do this research and if they provide it to companies, but they are a direct consultant for marketing in all kinds of companies. And this guy has direct correlation with some of the biggest profiting companies and industries in the world, like Merck and Johnson, the pharmaceutical industries, and a lot of the giant food industry names. And then also the big companies in beauty and like hair products and whatnot. So to say that there's no direct correlation between the two would be hard pressed when they do this research and then their primary industry is consulting for companies. Interesting, to say the least. And if we're not aware that food is engineered in order to sabotage our reward system, we're missing something. And you can even feel it when you cut out processed foods and sugar that you find more pleasure in eating food. Like a carrot tastes good, sweet potatoes have a lot of flavor. And then you go to eat something that is highly processed, and your brain can make the connection of, wow, this is extremely addicting. It goes no different for many other things like alcohol or getting off your phone and social media. That's why so many people find benefit in doing a social media detox and whatnot, because you're giving power back to your brain. And that's in essence like the most important thing, is like understanding this and removing some of this processed food from our diets brings power back in your corner and doesn't allow for other things to control you outside of you. And man, we're doing a disservice to future generations. There's one person that was pretty influential in my life that said, and this was regards to the military, when you lose the desire to teach the ones that are going to take your position, it's time to hang up your boots. That's when you know you're done. And I look at what we're doing here in life as that too. Like if we're failing generations to come because we're too consumed by whatever we're consumed by, then what are we doing? We have this thing with an insane amount of information in it, and it's hard to figure out what's good to follow and what's not good to follow. And there's a new opinion on something every single day, but undoubtedly, a chemical concoction that we put into our body isn't going to be beneficial. So the article is pretty interesting. I recommend reading it. Probably fired me up writing it. The research is there. Check it out on solutionstowellness.org. And there's more to come. Like, subscribe, and share.